My normal body temperature is 34 degrees Celsius. Medically, it's considered hypothermia, and I probably should be dead. My parents and even the doctors were confused why I am still alive, breathing and functioning normally. Honestly, I wasn't always like this. My childhood was relatively normal. I was a timid child, preferring the company of dolls instead of playing outside with my older brother and sister. My siblings, Oliver and Leanne, were very rambunctious children. Our parents were used to going to the children's clinic occasionally after their horseplay. Unlike me, the two of them liked their scars. It was like a trophy or something in their minds. But we loved each other, and they tried to include me as much as possible in their games. When they played Dragon, Oliver, and Knight, Leanne, I was the trapped princess at the castle tower, Sofa. I was the queen, the humble peasant, or even just a passerby with no real roles in the game. But I was happy. I was happy to be included and still avoided stitches and bruises. Until the morning of my 6th birthday. I woke up with a terrible pain in my leg. I couldn't stand from the bed, and Leanne had to run to our parents' room for help. When Mom pulled down my covers, my right ankle was red and swollen. They took me to the emergency room, thinking I had an extreme allergic reaction to something. But the diagnosis was weirder than they thought. My ankle was broken, and I had bruises on both my legs, as if I had fallen down the stairs. The doctors asked my parents if I did fall, but our house was a one-story bungalow type. There were no stairs or any high places I could have fallen from, and the injury was too recent that it could only have been possible a few hours before we went to the ER. My parents, my siblings, and even I was confused how it was possible. In the end, the doctors concluded that I might have fallen off my bed. They put a cast on me, and I got to stay home for the next couple weeks. It was my first time to get a severe injury, and I did not like the feeling at all. I avoided joining my siblings' games after that, too afraid that I might accidentally get hit. Over the next few weeks, I stayed in my room with my dolls. One afternoon, as I was playing alone, I had a sudden pain in my right stomach. It was like a truck had hit me and I couldn't breathe. Luckily, Oliver ran past our room on his way to get his baseball gear. He saw me lying on the carpet with my mouth wide open, trying to get as much air as possible. He called Mom, who was in the garden, and they rushed me to the hospital. I had a large bruise on my right stomach, and the x-ray showed the bone on my lower rib cage was fractured. I told the doctors I was alone when it happened. No one in my family had ever hit me. I don't think they believed it. Child Protective Services were called to investigate if there was any child abuse at home. Us kids stayed with our aunt while I healed, and our parents dealt with the investigation. I think it was Leanne who planted the first seed of idea in my mind. You know, B, I get hit by a ball on my stomach when you got that pain. Maybe you're feeling the injuries I get. Kind of like a twin thing, but with sisters. I'm really sorry. In our childish minds, it made sense. We were too bonded, and I was too sensitive. The CPS investigation found no evidence of abuse in our home. My parents were good people who loved their children unconditionally. The three of us finally got to go home, and Leanne promised to be more careful if I was indeed channeling her pain in some way. I didn't get any more major injuries after that, but we noticed that I had a lot of random bruises on my body. Sometimes I even wake up with marks on my body like a cigarette burn. Those hurt a lot. Over the next couple of years, my parents sent me to doctors and specialists, trying to figure out if I had some sort of disease causing all those injuries. All my tests were negative. I was in good physical health, but I continued to get marks and bruises on my body. It eventually stopped, for a while. And then, when I was 10, it happened again. The 5 of us were at the park, flying kites or watching the ducks on the pond. I felt the air rush out of my body and my throat closed in. I felt like I was being strangled by an invisible force. The last I saw was my parents frantically calling for help before I passed out. My memories of that time are kind of blurry now, but I remember seeing a kid in my dream. He was around my age, and he kind of looked like me, except that he was very skinny. He was limping, and he had bruises all over his face. He looked at me with the saddest brown eyes, eyes that were eerily similar to mine. When I woke up, I was again at the hospital. It had become like a second home to me. My face and neck were swollen, and my throat was bone dry. I heard the doctors talking to my parents, saying words that didn't make sense to me. Strangulation, trauma on her face and neck, bruises similar to a thick rope around her neck and wrists. I just had an injury similar to a punching bag, and we had no idea why. Once again, CPS was called, but there were a lot of witnesses at the park that day. They all said that I randomly started choking with no external force whatsoever. The bruises also started appearing while I was unconscious, and the paramedics were trying to save me. I felt very afraid. There was an unseen force trying to hurt me, or even kill me. My parents sent me to more doctors. They thought I might have epilepsy or mental disorder, and that I might have been subconsciously hurting myself. I was homeschooled, and my parents took turns watching me sleep at night. When I turned 13, my parents decided to tell me the truth about myself. They thought that it might help me understand all the things that were happening to me. They sat the three of us down and told me, "B, we love you. Your brother and sister love you, and we always will, even if we don't share the same blood." I was adopted. My biological mother and I were found living on the streets when I was just a few months old. She was bruised, battered, half crazed, and rambling about leaving my other half behind. The Good Samaritans took us to an asylum where she passed away shortly, and I was given to an orphanage. During a church charity event, my parents went to the orphanage to give out toys and stuff. My father said I grabbed his hand, and he decided he would never let me go. They adopted me on the spot. After that revelation, I realized I might actually have a mental illness of some kind. My biological mother obviously had it, and I had no idea about my biological father. Since then, I stayed indoors a lot. Whenever I wake up to a new bruise on my body, I just thought that I might have done it to myself while I was asleep. I didn't tell my parents any more injuries unless I had to go to the hospital. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and my psychologist thought that I was subconsciously hurting myself during my sleep. Still, I didn't tell anyone about the boy I kept seeing in my dream. As I grew up, he also grew in my mind. We began to look more like each other, but his injuries worsened. I felt a weird connection to that boy in my dream, and I felt sad whenever I woke up. The last major injury I had was when I was 16. I woke up in the middle of the night, choking in my own blood. I could feel my lungs collapsing inside me. With the little air I had, I screamed for Leanne, and she woke up and immediately called 911 as she raced to get our parents. At the ER, I felt pain like I never felt before. I knew I was dying. The cold started at my fingertips, spreading like wildfire all over my body. It was cold and hot at the same time. I couldn't breathe, and my vision was tunneling. When the pain reached its limit, I passed out. I dreamed of the boy again, but he was brutally beaten. He was lying on the floor, and he kept whispering, "Ryan, Rachel, Ryan." I woke up with fractured and broken rib cages, collapsed left lung, broken collarbone, swollen larynx, and multiple bruises on my arms and legs. I had multiple surgeries and steel pins attached inside me. I had to be on 24/7 observation, and they constantly drained water collecting in my lungs. It was the most agonizing year of my life. Aside from the physical therapy I had to do, I was also subjected to multiple sessions with psychologists and psychiatrists. I was depressed and confused. My parents believed I did all those injuries to myself, and they were as depressed as me. Even after my bones and wounds healed, I had to stay at the hospital for constant observation. My vitals were checked every 5 minutes because my heart rate was too low. My oxygen level was also below normal. and my temperature remained at 34 degrees Celsius. In all medical sense, I should be dead, but I'm not. After a year of daily checkup, the doctors finally gave up in finding the reason for my unusual temperature. I was allowed to go home to continue healing. My parents, my siblings, and I continued seeing a family therapist to deal with the trauma. During one of the private sessions, I mentioned Leanne's comment from so many years ago, how I was too sensitive to the pain of my siblings, and the therapist woke me up with this. Probably, and even though they're not your blood relative, your bond is still too strong. Yes, Leanne and Oliver may be my siblings, but I was adopted. I shouldn't have that kind of intimate connection to them. As Leanne had said, it was a twin thing. When I turned 18, I told my parents that I would go and find my biological family. I wanted to understand where I came from and why those things happened to me. They were worried, of course, so Oliver decided to accompany me. We went to the orphanage, where I got to know my mother's name, Rosalie Evans, and the asylum where she passed away. With a little help from my dad, who was a lawyer, I got Rosalie's medical records from the asylum. She was indeed a little crazy in the end, but the doctors believed it was the result of years of physical and mental abuse. Her body had a lot of bruises and scars from old beatings. I dug a little deeper into her life. She was involved in a lot of domestic abuse reports. It seemed her husband beat her a lot, and their neighbors would repeatedly report him. But at the station, Rosalie would always deny the abuse and gave excuses about her injuries. She was blindly in love with that bastard, and she wouldn't leave him until the day her children were born. As I journeyed on to find my past, I was shocked by another revelation. I was a twin. I found my birth records using Rosalie's name and found out my real name was Rachel Evans, and I had a twin brother, Ryan. At that moment, everything clicked in my mind. The boy in my dreams was my twin. The man I refused to acknowledge as my father was an abusive and disgusting excuse for a human being. My mother was able to run away with me, but couldn't bring my brother along. Ryan was left to be raised by that awful man, and he suffered all his life for it. I tried to find Ryan. I told Oliver that I wanted to save him, but I knew in my heart I was too late. And I was. We never found where Ryan was buried, probably somewhere in a pauper's grave. They moved a lot when he was still alive, so it was difficult to trace his life. But we found his medical records. Like our mother, he had many healed fractures and scars from years of abuse. At 16, he died of internal bleeding from a collapsed lung after an altercation with his drunk father, who treated him like a punching bag all throughout his short life. Everything that happened to me was because of Ryan. Leanne was right. It was a twin thing. Every abuse and pain my brother felt, I felt. And when he died, I think a little part of me died too. I'm just glad that when Ryan left this world, he took the bastard with him to the grave. I found his name too, but I don't feel like glorifying his memory in this post. He doesn't deserve that. All I will say is that he was found at a roadside, crazed and mumbling something about his dead kid haunting his dreams. They took him to the same asylum where my mother died, and he was found one morning hanging from the window. Years have passed since then. I have come to accept my weird past and my even weirder present. I was lucky to find a man who was as warm as I am cold, and we are expecting twins in the summer. I think if I get boys, I'll name one of them Ryan, for the boy of my dreams and the brother I never got to know. I always thought suicide was simple. I was taught from an early age that it was wrong, period. It was never the answer. There were always other options, always other ways out. Suicide wasn't an answer. See, my parents are deeply religious. I don't mean that they're cultish or crazed zealots or anything like that, but they hold very seriously to biblical verses. Because of that, they always saw the commandment of thou shalt not kill as applying to suicide as well as murder. They taught me that ultimately they're the same. Suicide is no better than murder, because it is the murder of yourself and an abandonment of hope. They taught me that now, how hard things got, they could never get that bleak. I wish I could have been that naive, but I wasn't. It was 7 years ago to this day when I was told that I have a terminal brain tumor. I was only 19 at the time, still living with my parents, as I worked my way through community college, and anyone could see that things were rough already. My dad had just been fired from his job. We were behind on payments for our house. I could barely scrape up enough money to pay for each semester already, and I knew that this news would break them. We couldn't fight this. Not really. Trying to keep their daughter comfortable as she slowly died would just suck them dry. At that point, I was also broken emotionally. I had just lost my girlfriend of 3 years to a car accident, and my closest friend had moved across the country a few months earlier. My parents and I weren't getting along very well, and when I was told the news, I couldn't have felt more alone in the world. I had thought suicide was simple. Then, I thought it was the answer. It was a week and a half after I found out when I decided to kill myself. My death was inevitable anyways, and this would help them in the long run. The decision made me surprisingly calm, and I knew exactly when and how to do it. My parents both worked on the weekdays, and they left the house empty. All I had to do was circle back after I left for classes, when I knew they were gone, and I'd be good to go. I knew my dad kept a handgun in his study drawer, and it was easy to find and load. I had shot it before. He had taught me how. I remember everything about that moment. It was late morning, and the sun filtered through the blinds of my father's study. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking quietly across the room. I could feel the hard mahogany desk behind me, and could see my hand as I raised it up to my eye level, my wrist trembling a bit as I leveled the gun to my temple, and I took a deep breath. I counted the ticks of the clock. 1, 2, 3. I pulled the trigger. I felt the bullet rip through me. I know that sounds insane, but time seemed to slow to the milliseconds. I could feel the bullet tearing through my skin, ripping a hole in my skull before ultimately shredding through my brain. It didn't hurt, not like it should have. It was more of a dull awareness that my senses shouldn't have had, and I felt the bullet exit my skull in the same way. Then time sped up again, and my body collapsed in a heap. I couldn't move. I couldn't look anywhere. I just lay there and felt my heart stop. I could see blood trickle out into a sticky pool of red around me, conscious all the while. I couldn't understand it. My mind wouldn't understand it. I had shot myself point blank in the head, and I was somehow bleeding out on the floor and fully conscious. It was impossible. I had thought suicide was simple. Then I thought it might be the answer. As it turned out, it was something much more dangerous and far more horrific. I don't know how long I lay there, but ultimately I was able to pull myself to my feet. I looked around myself in shock at the mess I had made in the study. Blood covered the floor, the desk, my clothes, everything. The wall behind me had stains of red mixed with chunks of brain plastered across it, and I stumbled back in horror. I saw the evidence before me, the proof of my suicide, and yet there I stood, conscious and living. Feeling numb, I subconsciously reached my hand up to my temple, and my fingers felt the hole in my skull. They came away warm and sticky, covered in fresh blood, still oozing from the wound, and I couldn't comprehend it. I couldn't make sense of it. The world was spinning around, and my brain couldn't function, couldn't comprehend what was happening to me. I could tell the symptoms of a panic attack were coming on, and I would have normally focused on settling my breathing. Then I realized I wasn't breathing. I couldn't feel my heart, which should have been hammering away in my rib cage. My breaths, which should have been panicked and shallow, weren't there. For all purposes, I should have been dead. I was dead. Was I a ghost? Was this a dream? I didn't know. After the initial shock died away, I was able to focus on my surroundings. Other than the mess of my own gore, everything seemed in place at a glance. But on closer inspection, I realized that there were subtle things that were wrong. The colors of the room were dulled, like when someone turns down the contrast in a photo. The grandfather clock wasn't ticking, and the clock hands remained unmoving. The blood on the wall hadn't moved since I had gotten up, hadn't dripped down the wall any further. Stationary droplets hung to the paint, defying gravity. Nothing in the study made sense, and as I was still examining the room, the light from the window slowly dimmed and faded to darkness. In a few short seconds, I was left standing in complete blackness with time itself standing still. Then, from somewhere downstairs, I heard a screeching howl. It was shrill and painfully loud, ripping through the silence of the study like a jackhammer in the middle of a Sunday Mass. I might not have been thinking rationally at the time, but I had enough sense to pick up the gun from the floor beside me as I backed up rapidly. It was ironic when I think about it now. A few short minutes earlier, I had tried to end my own life. Now I was suddenly afraid of losing it, or whatever state of consciousness I had. Seconds later, a deep red glow appeared in the hallway outside of the study. The screeching continued, getting louder as the glow grew brighter, and I instinctively took a few steps back in alarm. It was too dark to see, and my foot slipped on the puddle of my own blood, still on the floor, and my legs went out from under me. I crashed to the floor and the handgun went skidding out of my hands. Then I caught a glimpse of what was making the screeching, what was causing the glow. A figure stepped into the study from the hall, a tall, gangly figure that had to stoop to fit under the doorframe. It was naked and covered in black scales, and the long limbs twisted as it stepped forward. Its eyes shone like red spotlights, piercing the darkness of the room as I scrambled backwards in panic. I wasn't even aware that I was screaming until it spoke. Well, spoke isn't exactly the right word to use. It paused in the doorway, those burning red eyes fixed on me. Behind them I caught a glimpse of a horned head and sharp, gleaming teeth, but that mouth didn't move. Yet somehow I heard deep, guttural words echo in my mind. "Why are you screaming, little one?" I instinctively shut my mouth and the creature tilted its head at me. "Are you afraid of me? Are you afraid of this place?" "What? What are you?" I stammered as I crawled back. Something that was reminiscent of laughter echoed in my head, although there was no humor in it. It was a twisted, warped sound. "Little one, I am the demon of the beyond, the ruler of this realm, of the in-between that exists, between life and death. You've entered into my domain." "How?" I gasped as my back came up against the hard wall. There was nowhere else to go, no more places to back up to. The demon took another step forward, and this time I felt the ground shake beneath his mighty steps. His eyes never once turned away from me, illuminating my body and the section of the room around me in an eerie light. "It's simple. You ended your life on your own, and that gave it to me." I stared, mouth agape. What did that mean? That suicide led to this? That was foolish, ridiculous, impossible. I believed that after death there were only two options, heaven or hell. Suicide, accident, sickness. It didn't matter how you died. How you lived, however, mattered where you ended up. But yet, here I was, dead, yet alive, talking to a demon in my father's study as time stood still. As if reading my thoughts, the demon continued. "I do not control eternity itself, but I'm given this little slice of it. When you decided to play God and end your own life, you came to me, not to him, not to the other. You became mine, little one. And now I give you a choice." "What kind of choice?" I asked as I stood up to face the demon. It still towered over me, but I refused to let myself seem powerless. You can either take your chances and pass on through my domain, maybe ending up in one of the two eternities, maybe falling into the void of nothingness, or I can send you back to your mortal world without the fatal wound you inflicted on yourself and without the fatal curse that God has bestowed to you. My mouth went dry. You're lying. How can any of this be real? I swear, a different glint came into those horrible eyes as I spoke, and the demon was suddenly at my throat, lifting me into the air by a shockingly powerful arm, and I found myself staring into that gaping maw of teeth. Do you doubt my power, little one? The voice snarled in my mind. I can drain your soul like it's nothing if I so desire. Then, what do you want from me? I managed to gasp out. The mouth closed, then morphed into something like a smile. A successor. I dropped to the floor and hit the ground hard, and the demon moved back a step as it spoke. I tire of being trapped in this realm, a curse given to me by the devil. I hold power, but not enough to release myself, unless I gift that power to another mortal. If you swear your soul to me, I will restore you to your life fully healed, and then when you die, decades later, you will take my place as the gatekeeper of souls in this wretched land. I swallowed hard. And if I refuse? You will wander for several lifetimes here without my guidance, until you either stumble into heaven or hell by chance, or the void claims your soul. The latter is far more likely. The choice is yours. A choice. But there was really no choice left to make. I had tried to kill myself. I had tried to die. And I saw a glimpse of what would happen to my soul if I let go. Suicide wasn't the answer. It was simply the first step to an impossibly painful path. I didn't want that, but to become like this creature. I looked around me then, taking in the study illuminated by the red glow. I saw the pictures of my family on my dad's desk. I saw the Star Wars mug I had given him when I was 10, and the smile it had given him. I saw the trips he and my mom went on with me when we didn't have much to spend, but had made the most of it. I saw the good times and the bad, and I made another decision right then and there. I decided that I didn't want to lose them, not for good. You swear to me that you can take away my tumor as well? I asked hesitantly. I swear on the lake of fire itself, the creature said. You will be restored to a full and healthy life, a life that will be untampered with until your demise. Then you will take my place, and I will be released. Then I accept your deal, I said, and I silently prayed that I hadn't made a mistake. In the blink of an eye, the study was back to normal. 1 second it was darkness, with the demon standing before me, and then the next, the morning light was shining through the blinds and the grandfather clock was ticking away angrily across from me. The demon had disappeared, and so had any signs of my attempted, or rather successful, suicide. The blood and fragments of gore had disappeared from the walls and floor, and the gun wasn't anywhere where I had left it. I later found it back in the drawer where I had gotten it. In fact, everything was normal in an instant, and I found myself wondering if what I had just seen was some kind of crazed nightmare. Groaning quietly, I put a hand on the desk beside me to pull myself to my feet, and that was when I saw it. There was a symbol etched into my right wrist, a half-open pentagram that was seemingly carved into the skin. It glowed a faint red like the demon's eyes, but faded away into nothingness after a few moments of looking at it. I know now that what had happened was very much real. The doctors verified, to their amazement, that my tumor had apparently disappeared. I had survived my suicide and was given a second chance at life, a chance that ended up being able to help my family get through their financial struggles and meet the person that would become my wife, a wonderful woman named Amber. But on nights like these, when I'm lying in the dark, alone, I can almost see him standing again in the doorways. My wrist starts to burn, and when I glance down at it, I can once again make out the symbol that's been burned into me. The symbol of the demon of the beyond. The symbol of my fate. And on nights like these, I appreciate the second chance I've been given, but I can't help but wonder at the cost of it that I have yet to face. My son Josh is a great kid. He's always been the quirky and curious type, taking apart watches, toys, and the like, just to see if he can put them back together again. His curiosity, however, took a dark turn when his mother died. Josh became a different kid after that. He suddenly became obsessed with the notion of death and what it means. Thus, it came as no surprise when I found out what he had decided to do for his science fair project. "I'm testing the line between life and death, Dad," he had said matter-of-factly as he sat eating his jam and toast. What do you mean, buddy? Watch this." Josh seized my iPhone, which had been resting on the table, and flung it into the kitchen sink before I could stop him. "Josh!" Josh turned the water on and seized a can opener, whacking the poor phone repeatedly. The screen cracked and the phone itself died. I wanted to yell, but I knew that wasn't the right thing to do. I had to discipline him some other way. "Josh, why would you do that? Do you know how much it's going to cost for me to get that fixed?" "Don't worry, Dad. You won't have to pay for anything." He picked the phone up out of the sink and ran upstairs to his room. I stared after him, shaking my head. I seethed about my son's troubling spontaneous behavior all day at work. When I got home, however, I found my iPhone, screen completely fixed and all. I picked it up, studying it, and found that it was working as if nothing had happened to it at all. "Buddy?" Josh came running down the stairs, goggles over his eyes, and a PlayStation controller in his hand. "Yeah, Dad?" "Who did you get to fix this, and where did you get the money to pay for it?" Josh tilted his head. "What do you mean? I did it myself. That was my first experiment for my project, Dad. I'll move on to phase 2 and document everything tomorrow." I watched, confused, as he ran back up the stairs. I had no idea what he was up to, but I was just happy that I didn't have to pay an arm and a leg to get my phone fixed, or to get a new one. Josh's little experiment seemed harmless. Then came phase 2. I walked into the kitchen the next morning, prepared to make breakfast and coffee, and stopped in my tracks. Josh was standing in front of the counter, a pigeon strapped down to the cutting board in front of him. I immediately had a bad feeling about this. "Josh, buddy, what in the world are you doing?" Josh held up a large pair of scissors. "It's phase 2. Now watch this." I lunged towards the counter, but it was too late. In one swift move, Josh had decapitated the helpless bird. There was a sickening clipping sound, and then the blood was leaking all over the cutting board and my kitchen counter. This time, I lost it. "Josh, what the hell is the matter with you? Why did you do that?" Josh looked frightened by my reaction, as though he hadn't expected me to lose my crap after watching him kill an innocent animal. "Dad, I already told you, it's phase 2. I dropped him off at school and called a psychiatrist. Maybe his mother's death had hit him harder than he was letting on. I have heard stories about serial killers killing live animals when they were children, and I'd be damned if my son turned into a killer. I scheduled an appointment for the next day. When I got home, I found Josh sitting on the couch in the living room, writing in his journal. His poster board for his project was leaning against the wall by the TV. I couldn't help but notice that there was bird crap next to the TV as well. "Josh, what is—" A pigeon swooped past my head and landed on the couch, cooing softly. I jumped at it, hoping to grab it before Josh could, but he made no moves. The pigeon shot back up into the air, out of my reach. "Why is there another bird in here? I swear if you—" "It's not another bird, Dad. It's the same one from earlier today." Josh and I stared at each other for a few minutes. I was sizing him up while simultaneously wondering what the hell had suddenly gone wrong. "That can't be, Josh. You cut that bird's head off, remember?" Yeah, and I put it back on. I brought him back. This project is going really, really well, Dad. I'll beat Cindy Pickens for sure this year. I was entirely positive that Josh had just captured another bird and was losing his mind. But when I checked the garbage can, the bag that I had placed the decapitated bird in was gone. This had gone past the point of too far. Josh had gotten rid of the corpse and was attempting to convince me that he had somehow raised it from the dead. This was meticulous and premeditated. I really did worry about my son, and I am not ashamed to say that I slept with my door locked that night. Well, until about 2 a.m, that is. I was awoken by the last thing you want to hear at 2 a.m, someone beating non-stop on your front door. Well, beating may be a harsh word. Whoever was knocking was doing it forcefully, but there was not much strength behind the knocks. Still, it scared the hell out of me, but not nearly as much as the sight of Josh standing in the living room, white as a sheet, staring at the door. "Josh, why are you out of bed?" Josh turned to me, his eyes wide in terror. "Why? What's the matter, pal? Go back upstairs. I'll figure out who this is." "Don't open the door, Dad. I messed up." The slow knocking continued behind him. Messed up how? Josh stared me in the eyes. I wanted to do something really good for Phase 3, so I brought Mom back. Knock, 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 knock. "Joshua, your mother has been dead for almost 2 years. This isn't funny." I made a move for the door, but Josh jumped in front of me, grabbing my hand. "Don't open it, Dad. Don't open it." He and I are still sitting in the house. The knocking has stopped, but now there is clawing at the window. I keep asking my son if he can undo his mishap, but he says only one thing. "I'm gonna beat Cindy Pickens for sure this year." No Sleep is closing to the public for a few days. Apparently, that gives me hope. Maybe the reason why is that others have finally caught on to what's really going on here. I'm sorry. I don't know where to start with this, how to introduce myself, how to start a story. I've never been good with any of that. To put it frankly, I've never really been particularly good at anything. You could say I'm a failure at life. I'm a high school senior that has no friends, no girlfriend, and doesn't have a single clue about what he wants to do for graduation. I was never good at sports, or art, or writing, or anything like that. The only thing I really enjoy in my spare time is reading, and that's what first brought me here, to read about the horrific experiences of others. To put it simply, I love scrolling through this subreddit. At first, I never really gave any thought to the posts I read, but in time, I started thinking long and hard about every single one I would read. I started to understand them more than I ever did, and I fully realized what No Sleep is. No Sleep is a chronicle of dark events and nightmares. It's full of warnings, written accounts from those of us who have witnessed the unspeakable and desperately want to warn the world before it happens to them as well. I've devoted most of my free time to proving that, to hunting down proof and records of the events we read about. But I never expected that proof to find me first. Throughout most of my high school life, I've spent most of my free time hunting down the stories behind the posts of No Sleep. See, we all know about the horrifically real origins of all the experiences we post, but there are so many skeptics on the outside who don't. And I figured that if I could find evidence that definitively proved just a few of the posts on No Sleep are true, people would start taking us seriously. So, I devoted my time to scouring the internet for missing persons cases, for police reports about murders, anything I could tie to one of the stories on here. So far, evidence was few and hard to come by. I found a few bits of pieces here and fragments of news stories and unexplained deaths there, but there wasn't much objective, concrete evidence to go on. I was starting to accept that people on the outside, they would never believe because they didn't want to believe. They didn't want their eyes to be open like ours have been. But everything changed on my first day of Thanksgiving break. It was around 10 in the morning, and I was scrolling through Reddit on my phone. I had just finished checking my gaming subreddits and just switched over to No Sleep. Like most of my subreddits, I tend to sort by new, and the first post I saw when I logged on was one titled, Ben Doesn't Believe, by u/Corey Como. That kind of caught my eye because my name is Ben as well, and the title has so little information. So I clicked on the link. This is what the post said, copied word for word from screenshots I took. Ben doesn't believe. He's living in blissful ignorance as he fools himself and fools others. He likes to pretend that this boring, monotonous existence is all that is there. Ben doesn't want to believe that there's something else, something out there that's more than him. He doesn't want to believe in God. He doesn't want to believe in demons. But believing or not believing doesn't make a difference to the truth. It only means that you're either in acceptance or denial. Ben lives in Cleveland, Ohio, and he's failed in every single way possible. He tries to bury his emptiness by immersing himself in fiction, in books, in games, in shows, but even that's not helping anymore. He doesn't want to believe anything. He doesn't want to believe that every day is another day closer to his inevitable death, unless he changes his mind and starts to believe. Ben won't believe this now. As he reads these paragraphs, he won't believe when it comes for him. He won't believe until it's too late, because that's what Ben does. He wastes his opportunities. Something about that post unnerved me more than anything else I read that day. Maybe because of how short it was, or because of the odd style in which it was written, void of almost any detail. Maybe it was because of how my name was Ben, and that I lived in Cleveland too, and that it was a pretty freaky coincidence. But that was all it was. A weird coincidence. I mean, it couldn't possibly be about me. Who would want to post about me? I'm perfectly normal and perfectly sane. I didn't even think about the whole incident until 2 days later. I was scrolling through Reddit again, this time late at night when I couldn't sleep. I guess that's ironic looking at No Sleep, when I could get no sleep. I had been reading stories for almost half an hour, and at that point, I was skimming through titles looking for anything that caught my eye. That's when I saw it, a post from 3 hours ago titled, Ben Lost His Chance. At first I thought it was a sequel to the other weird one I read a few days back, but this post was written by u/3462937black8. Weird username, but I was curious. I clicked the link. Why is Ben still awake? It's almost midnight, were the first lines, and I froze. It was almost midnight my time. My name was Ben, and after that last post, was this really somehow about me? I shrugged it off. Coincidence was all it was. Strange, freaky, really improbable coincidence. I kept reading. Ben is still awake because he missed his chance. He read the truth and he ignored it. He didn't believe, and now there's nothing left for him. He's lying awake in a dark room in his 4-bedroom house, the one at the end of that long, empty street. He's reading this by the dim light of his phone that's only at 17% power, but he doesn't care. He doesn't care about anything anymore. Do you, Ben? I dropped my phone and rushed over to the light switch, filling my room with blinding yellow light with one flick of the hand. There was no one in my room, despite whatever sudden irrational fear was telling me. I looked out the window, but the street was deserted, just like that post said. I lived in a 2-floor, 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood that's still under construction. As of right now, ours is the only house on that street, so it's mostly empty. And I was lying on my bed, scrolling through my phone, unaware that my battery had dropped down to 17%. Everything that post had said was true for me. Someone, somehow, was watching me and posting about me in a place devoted to the paranormal. What the hell did that mean? I gingerly picked up my phone again, having seen that there was still one paragraph left in the story. At this point, I was pretty sure it was some kind of sick joke. Someone from school, maybe. Or maybe it was my older brother, who was also home on break, playing a prank on me. Maybe even it was some of the online friends I had, the ones that had first told me about no sleep and discussed the stories and their implications long into the nights. Either way, someone was messing with me, and I wasn't very happy about it. I read the last paragraph. Ben is starting to wonder now if he has this all wrong. How would anyone know things like that? How would they know that the pajamas he's wearing right now are red, or that his favorite drink is iced tea? Or how would some stranger know that he blames himself for Sienna's death? How would they know about that stash that he's hidden underneath that loose floorboard? How would someone on the internet know about his crush on Grace? How would they, Benjamin Kona? I suddenly switched my phone off and threw it across the room in a burst of anger. This was going too far. Whoever was playing this practical joke using my real name was one step too far, and exposing those things online was just wrong. But with a start, I suddenly realized the gravity of those words. No one from my school knew about my crush on Grace, and no one, not even my family, knew about Sienna. She had been one of my closest friends, someone I had met online, and she had killed herself in my freshman year. For the last 3 years, I held myself responsible for her death because I hadn't been home the day it happened, and she had tried to call me that day. How would someone know about that? Why would someone know about that? Or more importantly, why would someone or something post about me here? I couldn't understand it. What was to gain? What was the point of all of it? And who or what the hell was doing all this to me? I fell asleep that night thinking over and over about that post. When I woke up, the first thing I did was log on to Reddit so I could report the post and message the mods about it. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach when I searched for it and found that the post had been deleted. And not just the post, but the first one from 2 days ago was gone too, as were the accounts Corey Como and 3462937 Black 8. They had all been deleted without a trace, and I was left with nothing. I still sent a message to the mods, but what could I say? That I thought some crazy cyberstalker was posting random things about me on a subreddit meant for paranormal experiences? Sure, I had copied the text of the posts by screenshot the night before, but if the accounts were already gone, they couldn't do anything about it. Needless to say, I didn't much enjoy that Thanksgiving. I felt like my privacy had been violated horribly. The entire next 2 days, I kept looking over my shoulder and out the windows. Even after my brother left to go back to college, I never caught a glimpse of anything unusual. But someone, somehow, had found out things about me. I almost said something to my brother about it, but I knew he'd just laugh at me. He was someone who refused to see the truth about the sides of the world that were hard to believe, and so I kept quiet in my growing fear. Needless to say, I didn't log on to Reddit for a few days. When I logged back on, I wasn't surprised to see that my message to this subreddit's mods hadn't been answered. After the last post, I almost didn't check the feed here. I was scared that I'd find even worse. But a part of me was still being skeptical. After all, the posts and users had been deleted, right? So I took a deep breath and flipped the feed from hot to new. I froze in my chair as the page refreshed, displaying the first 4 post titles, all from different accounts. Ben is a coward. Ben still doesn't believe. It's coming for Ben. And the last one. Ben, you're too late. Don't run. Don't hide. My mouth went dry, and my mind went blank. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think straight. I've never had one before, but I'm pretty sure I was in the middle of a panic attack. I was starting to get the sinking feeling that this wasn't some stalker or person trying to prank me. I had the horrible realization that the evidence I'd been looking for all those years was happening to me in that very moment. When I was finally able to snap myself back into reality, I ran downstairs and checked the doors. All were locked securely, and the garage was closed. But I noticed my dad's car was gone. He probably was working the early shift today. Going back to my room, I felt a little less scared when I saw my mom in the kitchen making breakfast. Someone was trying to get to me. Or something was trying to get to me. The posts are never, ever wrong, And if someone was posting things about me, then it had to be true. What that meant terrified me more than anything. I had just gotten back into my room when my phone pinged with a notification. I pulled it up, and in the back of my mind, I knew that this was very, very wrong. I had gotten a notification from Reddit that u/239-81170-RED66 has made a new post to No Sleep. I'd never enabled notifications for Reddit. I never subscribed to any user, let alone one I'd never heard of before. But for some reason, I felt like I couldn't ignore this. I might finally have had my evidence right in front of me. My finger tapped the open button before I even knew what I was doing. No More Warnings was the title. This is what was in the post. Ben thought he could escape by staying offline. He thought he could escape if he didn't read, because he knows that if he reads, he'll believe. And now, it's far too late to believe. He's been running too long, and has been too distracted by his meaningless existence. The truth is staring Ben in the face, but he can't see it. Just like he never realized that his father never came from his late shift at work last night, at the Kohl's in Westgate Plaza, where he works as a store manager. As I read that last sentence, I felt the panic stir in my stomach and rise up, catching in my throat and stopping my breathing. Had my dad not come back yet? Was that why he wasn't home? I wanted to just dismiss the idea as foolish, as a joke, but I couldn't. I couldn't run from this like I ran from everything else. The information that these posts had contained, the details about me, about Sienna, about where my dad worked. I was starting to realize this post was something far worse than a joke, or even a stalker's posts. I didn't want to read any more of the post, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. If you hadn't been so busy hiding from the truth, Ben, you might have realized soon enough to save him. How does it feel, knowing that you slept soundly, curled up peacefully in that thick red blanket of yours, as your father was ripped to bloody pieces and discarded in a ditch by the side of a road? How does it feel, knowing that you were as blind to the truth of your father's last breaths as you were blind to the truth of the posts you scrolled past? It's too late for you. There will be no more warnings. Do you believe now? Will you believe when you hear the truth when it calls? I felt my hand go numb, and my phone fell out of my fingers as I finished reading the last few words of that post. My mind was running in a million different directions at once, and I felt waves of every emotion from panic to fear to anger to sorrow to disbelief to shock wash over me. I had no time to process the horror that I'd just read, though. Only seconds later, I heard the ringing of our home phone downstairs. Will you believe when you hear the truth when it calls? And just like that, everything clicked into place, with a surge of nausea and sheer terror. I scrambled off my bed and leapt down the stairs, trying to reach the phone before my mom picked up. I knew what was coming. I couldn't let her hear it first. I couldn't make her go through that. "Hello, Kona household," I heard her say as I was halfway down the stairs, and I knew I was too late. When I sprinted into the kitchen moments later, the look of twisted shock on her face told me everything I needed to know. I felt my legs give way as I sank down to the floor, and I could feel the hot tears pouring down my cheeks as everything caught up to me. This was my fault. This was all my fault. It was a policeman on the phone, calling to let my mom know that they had found a dead man lying in a ditch by Interstate 90, and it was bad. They needed my mom to come down to identify the body, or more accurately, what they could find left of it. She told me all this as she hung up hastily, her voice sounding hollow from the shock, but I just nodded numbly. I knew it was him. My father was dead, just like that post said. It had told me the truth, and I didn't see it. It was a few minutes after my mom left that I remembered a post I read on the sub a week ago, something that I read and commented on then forgot about. It was an account about a creature that preyed on the weak and the tired, those who worked the night shifts. In the post, the creature would rip its victims to pieces and leave them by the side of the road after eating its fill. I had read that post and went about my day without even thinking that it could actually be true. By now, my dad was dead in the exact same way, and in that moment, it all clicked into place. The horrible, twisted truth of no sleep. No sleep isn't just a place for sharing our experiences, the paranormal and the horrific. It's a damn feeding ground. Everything here, every creature, every death, every account, can be used by them. Have you ever wondered why so many of us escape our brushes with death and things that, by all accounts, should have killed us? It's because they want us to live. They want someone to write about it, to post it out there, so the creatures can feed even more. I don't know if they live off of our fear, or if they literally live off of us. But the creatures of no sleep live, because we immortalize them on the internet forever. Every survivor writes out their transcript and sends it out for the world to see, but they also reveal their account to the mods. Have they ever wondered why this group of shadowy chaperones holds such strict rules and regulations for no sleep? It's because they're the culprits too. They mold the accounts of others into the perfect format to cause fear, and then they go and erase all the evidence that they can find. That's why I could never find a shred of proof. It was all erased on purpose. And somehow, something was trying to warn me about that. Maybe it was one of the mods who got tired of leading the readers to their deaths. I don't know. All I know is that if I listened to their warnings, my father would still be alive. I managed to pull myself up off the floor and shake myself out of my grief and self-pity, at least momentarily. I made my way upstairs to my room and grabbed my car keys, set on driving my car out to meet Mom, when my phone chimed a notification again. I froze and looked down at the face-up screen that was still on the floor. It was another notification from Reddit. Hello, u/23981170RED7 has made a new post to No Sleep. I felt my mouth go dry as I bent down to pick up the phone with shaky hands. I tapped on the notification, but the post title brought the flood of terror washing back over me. It's already in Ben's house. He's too late. I could feel my heartbeat racing as I opened the post quickly, but there was no post to greet me. There was only one word. Hide. I've been up here in my room with the door locked, hiding in the closet for almost 2 hours now. After the first hour, I heard the front door open, followed by my mom calling out for me. I frantically tried to dial her phone to warn her, but before I could, I heard an ear-splitting scream tear through the silence of the house. There were no more sounds, and when I tried her phone, no one picked up. I started typing this right after, desperately trying to get my own warning out in time, before whatever killed my parents finds me too. Maybe I'm just playing into his hands. Maybe it wants me to write about it so that I can grow stronger with every pair of eyes that reads this transcript. But I have to try. I have to try to get this warning out in time. Stay away from No Sleep. Everything you read about here can come for you at any time, any place, any day. I don't think every story is used by them to get to us, but the possibility is out there. The creature that killed my family is one of them, and I don't know how many more are out there that the mods are helping. If you think something from the posts here are following you, don't ignore it. And whatever you do, don't ever fall asleep. Stay awake. Stay alert. They're out there. They've always been out there. And they've always known we've been watching them. 7 years ago, I met the girl who could find the seams. You've got to see what Danny can do. I let myself be dragged across the park, past the swings and to the big oak tree, where a girl with long black hair sat with a pile of books beside her. She looked up at the small crowd of fellow children surrounding her, sighed, and set down her book. "Can I help you?" My best friend at the time, Jacob, beamed and plopped a stuffed bear on her lap. "Do the thing. Luca hasn't seen you do it yet," he said. Danny looked at me and my gaze immediately went to my shoes. "You don't have to if you don't want to," I murmured, feeling embarrassed about all the fuss my friend was causing. Jacob scoffed and crossed his arms. "You don't even know what she does yet. Come on, Danny, show him." "I don't mind showing you," she said before picking up the bear. She brushed her fingers against its face, and she smiled before she took her middle finger and ran it from the top of its head to its tummy. Like she'd taken a sharp knife to it, the bear split open, revealing white stuffing and the red heart that had been stuffed in there when Jacob got it. She lifted it up to show it all to us, before plopping it back on her lap and running her finger along the tear. When she pulled her hand away, the bear was whole again, like she'd never ripped it open. Jacob scooped the bear back up and turned to me. "Cool, right?" he asked. I shrugged. "I don't know, I guess," I said, knowing I probably looked less that convinced. Danny smiled then and got to her feet. "Okay, what do you want to see the inside of?" she asked. I glanced around the playground before pointing to the swing set. Can you cut that with your finger?" I asked. I might have only been a kid, but I was definitely not convinced by just cloth. Danny nodded and walked over, the crowd of kids following in her awe. She patted the chain of the pink swing before her finger sliced right through one of the links. The chain came free, and then she proceeded to slice open the plastic of the seat. She picked up the mangled swing, spinning around to show it really wasn't attached at all, before she reattached it, all with the touch of her finger. Now that convinced me. I probably looked like an idiot, just standing there with my jaw dropped while everyone else just clapped. "How do you do that?" I asked in wonder. Danny shuffled her feet, a small smile on her lips. "Everything has a seam I can pop open. I can do it to anything," she admitted. I dug through my pockets and managed to pull out my 3DS. "Can you open this up?" I asked. For the rest of the afternoon, Danny demonstrated her unique and bizarre powers to us. She did open up my 3DS, showing off all the electronics inside, and once she fixed it back up, it booted up just like nothing had happened. She opened up a Rubik's Cube, part of a branch, the monkey bars. Whatever we asked, she would demonstrate. Only if no adults were close, though. One of the other kids suggested she open up one of the cars in the parking lot, and she refused. One by one, we all went home for dinner, until it was just me and Danny. I was pretty awkward at that age, so we just stood in silence for an uncomfortably long time before I finally piped up with the question on my mind. "What do you want to open up?" She stared at me in surprise for a bit before she shrugged. I don't know. I don't really do it for myself anymore. I just do it so everyone else likes me," she said. I plopped down on the ground and pulled out my 3DS. "I don't have to be home for a while longer. My parents are working late. Want to play some games with me?" I asked. I don't think anyone really asked Danny to do something with them before that didn't involve her cutting some random object open, but she slowly nodded and sat beside me, and until it got dark we played games. I probably would have stayed out longer if the red light signifying red battery didn't start glaring at us. "I'll come back and play with you tomorrow, okay?" I said, sticking it in my pocket. Danny was grinning from ear to ear, her smile filled with joy. "I'd really like that, Luca," she said. That summer, I spent a lot of time in the park. Of course, it was fun watching Danny cut open whatever object we brought her, but it was more fun just talking with her. She was a really nice girl, after all, just quiet. There were several times I'd be playing my 3DS while she'd watch, and she'd end up falling asleep on my shoulder. She told me most nights she spent wandering around her home rather than sleeping. She never slept well. Then one day, I came to the park while it was raining. I had the stomach ache of a lifetime, but I wanted to see Danny, and she was there, as always. The rain was more of a mist in the air rather than a downpour, but I was more than glad to take a seat under the tree. Danny, of course, immediately picked up that something was off. What's wrong? You don't look so good, she asked, pulling her knees up to her chest. Stomach ache. Mom said there's a flu going around, so don't get too close, I said. Why? Or you'll barf all over me? Danny giggled before something clicked in that head of hers. Luca, you know when you asked me earlier this summer what I'd really want to open the seam of? I nodded. I lied. I kind of want... She blushed a little and murmured the next sentence so quietly I could barely make it out. I kind of want to see if a person has a seam. I responded by wiggling out of my t-shirt. Sure, maybe you can see what's going on with my stomach? I said. I know. What kind of dumbass move is that? But I was a kid, and what kid isn't a little curious about what goes on inside them? Danny clearly didn't expect my enthusiastic consent, but she did a little dance in place before glancing around. No one else is out here, but let's go behind the bushes, just in case, she said. Excitement brimming between the two of us, we hid behind the bushes as I laid down on the ground, staring up at the gray sky. It was peaceful back here. Okay, just start checking, I said. Danny knelt above me, and her cold fingers ran over my chest. I tried not to squirm since I was so ticklish. For several quiet seconds, I just laid there, wondering when she'd start. You can start whenever, I said, thinking she was losing courage. I've already started. I glanced down, and sure enough, she had. I hadn't felt a thing, but my skin over my torso had been opened right up, cut down from the top of my sternum to below my belly button. Skin, muscle, and ribs were just pulled open into the sides, so Danny could dig around in my guts. She slid open my stomach, and I saw remnants of digested food, the pancakes I'd had for breakfast. She sealed that back up quickly, so nothing was disturbed, as she proceeded to run her fingers through my intestines. That's so cool, I whispered, afraid if someone caught us now, the little spell she had over me would be broken. I'm not even bleeding. It was true. There was not a single blood drop lost. Nothing seemed desperate to pop out of me either. It was just there. I could see my heart beating, my lungs inflating and deflating with each level breath. I should have been afraid, but I wasn't. I was just fascinated to see what was going on inside of my body. There's something wrong. Danny scowled as she continued to prod, and then I felt a bit of hot pain. Careful, I hissed. Sorry, I don't really know how, but I think something's really wrong in here. Hold still, I'm putting you back together. I stayed still as she finished zipping up my chest. I sat up and poked at my chest as if I expected my seam to burst open and everything to come spilling out all at once. What do you mean something's wrong? Danny shrugged. I don't know. I really don't. I just looked around in there and something doesn't feel right to me. Go talk to your mom. I think she needs to take you to the doctor. Did you really not feel anything when I cut your seam? I shook my head and got to my feet, grimacing as that pain from my gut flared up. Not a thing. You're awesome, Danny. I'm going to go home now, though, I said. Please hurry. I went home and somehow managed to nag my mom long enough into taking me to the doctor's office about my stomachache. Of course, I'm sure you guessed by now it wasn't just a stomachache. Appendicitis. Luckily, it was all taken out before anything bad happened. But I was bedridden for 2 weeks. When I was finally well enough to play, I couldn't find Danny at the park. Asking around revealed she hadn't been back since that rainy day. She was gone, and she didn't come back into my life until the beginning of this school year. I barely recognized her at first. I'm not really a tall guy, but even compared to your average guy, Danny was practically a tree. She cut her hair short, and she'd grown up, but I saw her face and I knew. Danny. I ran up to her and nearly plowed her over in my eagerness to get to her. Danny nearly jumped out of her skin as she looked down at me. Then she realized who I was. Luca, is that you? She asked. I nodded eagerly, probably looking like an idiot. Yes. Oh my God, Danny, you're tall. I said. When she smiled, I felt like I was a kid in the park all over again. And you're still Luca. I'm so glad. I'm so glad to see you, she said before giving me a quick hug. Do you have lunch next period? We can talk then. Catch up? I barely touched my food because I was just too excited to talk to Danny. She was on the girls' basketball team, was already saving up money for college in a few years. She wanted to be a vet. Meanwhile, all I did was join the school's anime club and still have no idea what I want to do for a living. But she still listened. We didn't talk about seams. It was a silent agreement between us not to. I knew it happened. It wasn't something I made up. But the seams were something from childhood. We didn't need to open them up again. Well, we didn't. Until Danny was hit by a car and left to die by the side of the road. I only heard about it the following morning. One of her team members actually tracked me down to tell me. Apparently, I was the only person outside of the team that was really friends with her. Danny always worked late, and while she was walking home, some drunk joyriders plowed her over. She was found hours later, somehow still alive, and taken to the hospital. Several bones, including both legs and one arm, were broken. Ribs cracked. She was concussed and she lost a lot of blood. She'd be okay in the end, but there was a lot of recovery ahead of her. I nearly cried the first time I visited her in the hospital. Gratefully, she was sleeping at the time, so she didn't hear me sniffling, but I left her a card. It was sitting in her lap when I visited her the next day, and she was awake. But along with her body, her heart had been broken too. I'm never going to play basketball again. Don't say that. I tried to soothe her. Danny snorted. Even if I can walk again, I'll never walk without a limp, and running will be flat out. It's not a big deal. The way she shuddered when she said, not a big deal, gave away quickly that it was, in fact, a big deal. I held her hand and she squeezed her eyes tight as she struggled not to cry. I don't know what to do. They have no idea who hit me. I just know it was a black truck, that's all. They ruined my life, and they're not even going to pay for it, she said. Danny, do you remember the seams? Danny jolted like I'd hit her with a bolt of electricity. What about seams? She asked cautiously. I pulled up my shirt to show off my appendectomy scar. You were right that day about what was wrong. I might be dead by now if you didn't find my seam and look inside. I remember them. But do you? I've never forgotten. Her good hand stroked mine, and I watched as the skin split over the back of my hand. Another touch and it sealed right back up, good as new. It's why I want to be a vet. You know how many animals I can save with my gift? That's amazing, I said, flexing my hand. That day in the park? You didn't come back after that. Danny nodded. I scared myself a bit after I cut you open. And when you didn't come back the next day, I started having nightmares that your chest exploded and all your organs slid out of you. I wouldn't want to go back to the park if you weren't there anyway. Her brow furrowed. Why are you bringing this up now? I can't heal myself. I can only close a seam I opened. I swallowed before leaning in close and lowering my voice. Does opening a seam have to be painless? I asked. It took a second for Danny to get it, but she shook her head. It can hurt as much as I want it to, she said, her gaze turning cold. Then leave the rest to me. You work on getting better, and I promise I'm going to find out who did this to you. It did take months to track them down, but I got help. The girls' basketball team. They want to help Danny, and all I said was I was going to get her justice. They put their feelers out, and we got something. Corey. I never really knew Corey. He ran in a different crowd, but he had a black truck, drunk like a fiend, and rumor had it he bragged to a few close friends that he ran over that goth bitch, a.k.a. my friend Danny. My first initial instinct was to just go up and punch him in the face, but I knew that wouldn't work. I'd just get expelled, so I did the next best thing. I knew Corey was a crappy student, and we'd take the same bus to school. I waited until I heard him bitching about struggling with last night's math homework, and then I turned around. "Hey man, if you need a bit of help, I can double-check your work, fill in all the right answers if you missed any." He looked baffled, but handed me the paper. I did my best not to cringe at how god-awful his handwriting was, but I corrected his work and handed it back just as we got to school. The next day, Corey slung his arm around my shoulders and said, "Pal, buddy, I got 100% on that last assignment. I think this is the start of something beautiful." I smiled back at him. "I think it is," I replied. So yes, for the last month I became Corey's personal slave. I finished his homework, and in return, he was somewhat nice to me. He also blabbed a lot, and it was so hard not to just wreck his face when he told me about the night he ran over the goth. But I just thought of Danny in physical therapy, doing her damn best to walk again, and I just smiled and laughed. I got the names of the two other guys in his car, his closest friends, Jay and Thomas. I waited. The waiting was the hardest part, and I'm pretty sure my own grades slid a bit while I was doing both Corey's homework and my own. But it was all worth it for tonight. Because tonight, Corey and his friends were at a party, and I swung by at around midnight to see them stumbling out of the house, laughing their drunk asses off. I rolled down my window and called out their names, offering them a ride. They'd no doubt get pulled over in their condition. And hey, I had some more booze in my car. They could keep the party going in the back seat. Me? I was just the ass-kissing nerd that had been doing Corey's homework for the past month. They never even considered that I drugged the beers I so happily handed them in the back seat. One by one they passed out, and I went on to phase 3 of my plan. I'd planned ahead. I'd let 3 members of the basketball team know that the kind of justice I was looking for wasn't by getting them arrested and having them serve a nothing sentence, while Danny was going to struggle for so much longer with the injuries they gave her. I knew these 3 would go without it. They'd set up the perfect place, a basement in an abandoned building. I was impressed by how much effort they put into it. Plastic was rolled over the floor and part of the walls, and there was a pile of zip ties and 3 chairs set up in the center of the room. The hard part was dragging their unconscious asses down there. By the time I got the last one down there, I was sweating like a pig. But oh, it was all worth it when I brought Danny there, and she saw all 3 of them tied up and just starting to stir. She softly gasped as she looked between them. "Are you sure these are the guys?" she asked quietly. I nodded and gestured to them. "Do whatever you want," I said. Danny grinned ear to ear before she walked up to them. Corey was the first to really come to, his eyes fluttering, and he groaned before saying, How much did I drink last night?" "Too much," Danny chirped, pacing back and forth in front of her prey. That woke him right up. Corey's head shot up, and all the blood rushed out of his face as he recognized the girl in front of him, still walking with a crutch to support herself. He, of course, immediately tried to play dumb. "Do I know you? Because I've dated a lot of girls, so I can't really keep track of them." Danny slugged him across the face. "I'm the girl you ran over with your truck," she said, still smiling. Jay and Thomas had woken up from their beauty sleep by this time. Corey spat out a mouthful of blood before looking up and smirking at Danny. "Sorry, don't remember you," he said, smugness oozing out of the creep. Danny circled around the trio of hungover morons, watching how Jay flinched every time he heard the sound of her crutch hitting the ground. "I think he remembers," she hummed before she paused in front of Jay. Jay swallowed before glancing over at the others. No, I don't," he mumbled. Danny cocked her head to the side before she lifted up her hand. She waggled her fingers and then caressed the middle one right up his jawline and over his cheekbone. Jay barely realized that his cheek was hanging from a last inch of connecting flesh before Danny just grabbed it and ripped it right off. Jay screamed at the top of his lungs, blood pouring down his mangled face and down his neck. I could see his teeth and gums. The others looked on in horrific silence as Danny dropped the piece of flesh onto the plastic Let's try that again. Do you remember now? Yes, Jay wailed, tears sprouting at the corner of his eyes. It wasn't me driving. It was Corey. I thought we just hit a deer or something. But in the morning we heard about you. I wanted to tell someone, I swear, but they wouldn't let me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Danny hummed and nodded as Jay continued to babble his desperate apologies. I believe you, so you won't suffer any longer, she said right before she drew her finger right across Jay's neck. So much blood poured down the front of his shirt, a waterfall of blood splattering against the plastic as Jay's head lolled down. He certainly didn't suffer. He was dead in minutes, and all during those minutes, Thomas and Corey were screaming in terror. Any of Corey's smugness had vanished when Danny ripped open his friend's face and cut his throat. Danny turned her murderous stare onto the other two, still smiling from ear to ear. Thomas glanced down at her hand and realized it first. "Oh, where's your knife?" he stammered. All she did was raise her hand into the air and waggle her fingers. "These are my knives. I've always been a bit special." She carefully avoided the blood puddle as she limped over to Thomas. "And even though I'll probably never play basketball or have my full mobility again, you can't take away my gift to find the seam in everything." With just a brush of her fingers, she sliced through Thomas's jersey, and although he begged for his life, she just slowly dragged her hand from his stomach up to his collarbone while he howled in agony. Watching his skin just split by her touch was mesmerizing. The cut so precise, it was like a surgeon's scalpel. Another slice over the gut, and everything just spilled out. There was nothing like letting her find my seam in childhood, where everything just stayed perfectly still. I never knew how really long the intestines were until I watched them plop on the floor, still twitching and alive. Thomas stared in horror at his disemboweled guts until Danny drove her hand into his chest and I heard the loudest squish. Thomas's eyes rolled back and he almost immediately expired. Danny pulled out the remnants of his heart before throwing it on the ground. Corey was crying now, snot dribbling down his lips as he pulled frantically at his zip ties. "Please, it was an accident. It was just an accident, you crazy bitch," he yelled as she trotted in front of him. Danny had been smiling until Corey called her a crazy bitch. The smile dropped and she sighed, crossing her reddened arms across her chest. "Was it an accident that you drove drunk? Was it an accident that you just drove away? Didn't even attempt to call 911? Was it an accident you've spent all your time until now laughing about running me over?" Maybe I am a crazy bitch. Maybe I am. But if I'm crazy, then you're a downright sociopath. And odds are you'll kill someone else the next time an accident happens. She knelt down to his level and flicked his nose, watching the tip go flying off and sticking to the wall. Corey crossed his eyes to see the damage and promptly pissed himself. I could see the stain in his jeans. "Hey, Corey," Danny giggled, her smile returning and bordering on maniacal. "You ever hear of a torture called death by 1,000 cuts?" I'm just taking a break. Corey and Danny are still in the basement. Last I saw him, though, he barely even looked like a person anymore. She'd removed his nose, lips, ears, and eyelids. He's bald, cuts covering his entire scalp. Dozens of surgical cuts are decorating his arms, legs, torsos, and he's still alive, staring unblinkingly, someplace past begging and tears. But she's not going to let him die just yet. After all, she's been suffering for months because of that accident. He can take a few days before she finally lets him go.